Supporting capstone multilingual writers. Tips for developing scholarly voice. Developing scholarly voice in American academic English takes time and practice. It's also important to remember that daily English and academic English are two distinct skill sets. You can be fluent and comfortable in daily English and still struggle with the shift to academic English. Academic English isn't anybody's first language. It takes all writers time and practice to improve. But the more you actively read in American academic English, the more developed your scholarly voice becomes. By active reading, I mean really focusing on the text in front of you, not just the ideas, but how the ideas are organized and developed and how specific words and expressions are used in the document. A few general strategies for improving scholarly voice include taking notes on useful terms used in your field of study, using a thesaurus to expand the vocabulary used in your writing, and using a corpus, which is a large collection of texts, to search and learn about academic phrasing and formulaic phrases and expressions. For more on using a corpus, visit the Form and Style website to find a short video on using a corpus to revise for grammar and scholarly voice, as well as the Smart Guide on using a corpus. On the previous slide, I mentioned taking notes on useful terms used in your field of study. To do so, I suggest actively reading published manuscripts in your discipline. You can find recently published Walden dissertations and doctoral studies on the Walden Library website, and you can even search for some award-winning dissertations in your specific field. As you read these examples, examine the field-specific vocabulary and other rhetorical features of the documents. For example, look at common verbs you see used in your field of study, specific expressions that you see in published writing to introduce topics, build arguments, and show agreement or disagreement, how transitions and other cohesive devices are used, and how to summarize or close a discussion. Use the published examples as models to emulate as you write your own Walden capstone study. On the next 3 slides, I've included bullet points of more specifics to help develop scholarly voice. As a writer, you want to be aware of word choice and the vocabulary shift that occurs in American academic English. One simple place to start to improve scholarly voice is with verb choice. Often in English, there are choices between phrasal and prepositional verbs. These are verbs with more than one part, and they are often used in spoken English. But there may also be a choice to use a more formal, academic one-word verb, often coming from a Latinate origin. Choosing that more formal one-word verb can often elevate your scholarly voice. A few examples here are gone down versus decreased, or come up with versus develop, or look at versus examine. While all these verb choices are grammatically correct, choosing that one-word verb can help improve scholarly voice. The next bullet point here is on considering concision and specificity. Remember that scholarly writing should be clear, precise, and specific. So compare the phrase a lot of, which is 3 words long, versus the single word considerable, or the phrase gotten more intense, again, 3 words long, versus the single word intensified. The more concise and specific the word choice, the more scholarly the voice. Avoiding anthropomorphism is a third bullet point here. Anthropomorphism is the attribution of human characteristics to non-human entities. When there is anthropomorphism, the language is less concise and precise, and this can lead to ambiguity or to misleading communication. An example I included on this slide is, the article discussed many ideas. An article is not a human, so it can't discuss anything. If I revise this to Henderson 2023 discussed many ideas, I get rid of the anthropomorphism here and use much more precise language. This also elevates scholarly voice because the communication is more clear. On this next slide, the next tip here is to use boosting and hedging to avoid hyperbole. And you might be wondering what I mean by this. Well, you can boost claims with words like often or most, Or you could hedge claims with words like might or sometimes or perhaps. And this boosting or hedging makes the language more believable and more accurate. So, for example, rather than saying all teachers do this, you might change all to many or most and hedge the language a bit to make it more believable. Sometimes, in an effort to create more scholarly voice, the language instead becomes unbelievable because of an overgeneralization or hyperbole. The next bullet point here is the use of mid-position adverbs for more formal writing. Adverbs I find to be a really interesting part of speech in English in that they can often slide into various slots in a sentence. So we sometimes see them at the beginning of a sentence, at the end of a sentence, or before the verb in the middle of the sentence. Often, moving the adverb to mid position elevates the scholarly voice. For example, think of the example, it is necessary to follow the law carefully. Carefully, here is the adverb, versus it is necessary to carefully follow the law. Just moving that adverb to mid position elevates the scholarly voice in this example. Another tip on this slide is to keep in mind that per APA, the first person I is allowed and is preferred over the third person usage of writers referring to themselves as the researcher. The use of I does not detract from scholarly voice. Instead, it elevates it because the language is more clear and precise. We editors tend to get a lot of questions on this because it may be different from what you've previously learned. But again, I want to emphasize that the first person I is allowed and is even expected where appropriate in APA. So in my example here, instead of saying the researcher conducted semi-structured interviews, I suggest saying instead, I conducted semi-structured interviews so that it's clear who did this. Continuing to this next slide, I have a few more specific tips. The first one on this slide is to avoid the use of the second person you to address the reader. This can, in fact, alienate readers who don't feel like they are the you being referred to. Here's an example. As a nurse practitioner, you have to decide how to divide up your time among all your patients. Now, if I'm reading this and I'm not a nurse practitioner, I might feel alienated and not the intended audience for the writing, and maybe decide not to continue reading. Instead, this sentence could be revised to something like, nurse practitioners have to decide how to divide up their time among all their patients. The second person you here is gone. I don't feel alienated, and the sentence is again more clear and more precise. The next bullet point here says to avoid contractions like can't or won't. Write out the full words instead. So can't can be rewritten as cannot, and won't can be rewritten as will not. And one last tip here. When possible, choose the active voice over the passive voice for APA recommendations. The example sentence, the study was conducted by Thompson, is grammatically correct, but is written in the passive voice. Instead, this could be revised to Thompson conducted the study, which is now an active voice. The active voice is more concise and precise, and it's clear who the doer of the action is. In this case, Thompson. Overall, concision and precision are the main elements of APA, and a lot of these scholarly voice tips relate back to this overarching idea. Now that we've looked at some tips for improving scholarly voice, I'd like to take a look at a couple of examples of how these ideas can be incorporated into longer sentences. Example 1 on this slide reads as follows. This researcher thinks that the Every Student Succeeds Act needs to be revised on account of the fact that a lot of students are still failing standardized tests. This example sentence is completely grammatical, but it is quite long, 28 words to be exact, and the language here could be more scholarly. Of course, there are many ways to revise this sentence, but one possible revision reads as follows. The Every Student Succeeds Act should be revised because many students are still failing standardized tests. In this revision, note that the sentence is now 16 words long instead of 28. I've revised the sentence to get rid of the words the researcher, and I've attempted to be more concise and specific. The phrase on account of the fact that was changed to because, and a lot of was changed to many. Again, this is just one way to revise the original sentence. You might come up with another way that works just as well. All right, let's look at one last example. Example 2 on this slide reads as follows. The article looked into how different styles of leadership are and aren't effective. Smith, 2023. This original sentence is 13 words long, minus the citation. Now that's a lot shorter than the previous example sentence, but scholarly voice could still be improved. Again, like the previous sentence, there is not only one right answer here. One possible revision to improve scholarly voice would be to revise the sentence to read, Smith, 2023, investigated the effectiveness of different styles of leadership. In this revision, I revised to eliminate the anthropomorphism here. The article can't look into something, but a human can. In this case, it was Smith, the author, who did this, so I moved that to the beginning of the sentence for clarity so that it's clear who did what. I also changed the phrasal verb looked into to investigated, and I revised the phrase, how different styles of leadership are and aren't effective, to a more concise and precise phrase, the effectiveness of different styles of leadership. My proposed revision is 9 words long instead of the original 13. Just to reiterate, this is only one way to revise this original sentence. You might come up with the other way to do it that works just as well. I encourage you to continue revising your Walden Capstone document for scholarly voice using the tips discussed in this video. Happy writing!